All right. Thank you for listening to New England Horror Files podcast. We're back. So this is M and I'm Jay, and tonight we're going to
Hello.
be talking about Dudleytown, Connecticut. Now, just kind of briefly tell me like a couple things you've heard about Dudleytown.
Heard
Like if
it's the
actually
gateway to hell.
scratch that. It's the gateway to hell.
It's the gateway to hell, Jay.
Oh, geez. Oh, gateway to hell. I mean, you know what? That's one way you might, if you're just out there looking for information about Dudleytown, you might hear some things like that.
Mhm.
Is how the story goes. So some of the legends that are circling around Dudleytown are to do with going back to 15th or 16th, I believe, century England, where there was an English nobleman allegedly beheaded for treason, and then that said that the descendants of those noblemen brought it to New England and Cornwall, Connecticut, just before the American Revolution, and the whole area is cursed. There's dark forces there. There's weird creatures. There's demons in the forest. There's crazy weather patterns. It. Some areas are just hauntingly silent and just devoid of any life. Um, and all these sorts of things. It's sort of the catch-all haunted crazy place of New England. It's one of our premier attractions. So there's all of these sort of things going around. There's all of these sort of legends that, and it gets you could just go deep and find some find it getting crazier and crazier. But I'm just going to go over some of the most common things. So have you have
So,
you have you been there yourself?
so have I been to Dudleytown? So I make it a point to try to go to places like this because I find them fascinating and I'm always curious, right? Like I'm always curious to see how a place actually feels and like what's really going on there. I consider myself very intuitive. So the me and my husband are like, so how do we get to Dudleytown? Honestly, the answer is that you don't. Dudleytown is private property. It is actually monitored, and there is a fine if you go there. So the short answer is no. I have not been onto Dudleytown Hill. We we went to Cornwall. Of course, we took the drive to Cornwall, and I want to first say that Cornwall is utterly gorgeous. It's beautiful. Like I've seen some of the most beautiful scenery there, and it's so simple, but it's gorgeous. Um, so firstly, we didn't get to Dudleytown. We did drive up Dark Entry Forest Road, um, not quite understanding where we were or like, still trying to get our bearings. You cannot access Dudleytown Hill without trespassing. So I would highly suggest that you don't. But what I will tell you what we found in our research and in the surrounding areas. First of all, Cornwall, I do want to say Cornwall Historical Society has a wealth of information. They have a lot of very factual information about the town. This town, like I've said, is incredibly gorgeous. And it does have this weird color. That's not made up. That is absolutely true. When you drive through there, I think there's something about the way the trees grow, and they have, I believe, what is called a double canopy. So some areas have this interesting green color to all of the trees. And the way it's set up is you have the Housatonic River, which is a major waterway in northwestern Connecticut. I believe it goes into New York too. And then you've got Bald Mountain and Coltsfoot Mountain, which kind of like surround Dudleytown Hill. Um, and the village of Cornwall, like the town center, is situated at the top of the valley of those hills. And there is besides being hauntingly beautiful, it does have that strange color. And every time that we have been there, there's always a fog rolling in. And it's like a an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting afternoon fog that just adds to the eerie beauty of the place. Um, as far as, the actual history, I want to say that if you look around, on the internet, you will find a lot of folklore about Dudleytown, and you can also find a lot of um debunking of some of the lore. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I was like, am I just talking? And he just
Yeah, totally, totally here. I'm
um
here.
yeah, so some of these topics can be you can find if you go to the Cornwall Historical Society has a post about myths and facts, and you can go with some of these specifically bullet pointed. But one of them is about one of the earliest Dudleys in Cornwall, where they say he went mad, and Abiel Dudley. So actually, if you look up the historical record, he's listed in the Connecticut General Assembly. There was a petition for reimbursement for taking care of him. So back in the day when somebody didn't have family to take care of them, they would then become wards of the state or the town, depending how it was set up. And they would take over his care. So it seems like there might be uh some fact to maybe I don't know if you call it going mad, but he definitely, kind of lost his wits and had to be taken care of, which I mean,
Yeah, that's a
that's
natural thing, especially in those
yes,
days. Probably happening a bit earlier than maybe now. He's losing his faculties, but
right. Yeah, I
you
mean
know,
that's not
far cry
abnormal.
from demonic possession and insanity.
Right. Right, right. Um,
So actually,
so
yeah, let's talk about a couple of those things because it's interesting to see, um, like you were discussing the Cornwall Historical Society and the work they've done to debunk some of these things. And
well, yeah.
if you don't mind, so we are talking about A.B.L. Dudley. I don't know. I'm not sure if I cut you off. If you had more to.
No, not specifically. I think it's interesting to just look at that story in the historical context. And you have to think in context. It Dudleytown or Cornwall. See, I looked at Cornwall and the surrounding areas for a lot of because you can't get to Dudleytown, and that while there's tons of there's a lot of information on it, and even in there's newspaper articles about some of these people, and you could see that they existed. That um, Herman Swift, the Revolutionary War general, whose wife died on her porch. He's a real person. Like his wife is. I'll get to him in a minute, but um, historically, Cornwall was settled in 1740. So back in the day, like this was wilderness. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're looking at pre-colonial New England, this is before the Revolutionary War, and I mean, the raid on Deerfield, Deerfield, Massachusetts is the 91 corridor. Cornwall, Connecticut is 2 hours west-ish of 91. It's in that top corner of Connecticut. It's very close to Massachusetts and New York.
Mhm.
So, but and it's mountainous. Once you get into the mountains, there's Cornwall. It's in there. Offhand, I can't think of that town. Is it Tolland, Connecticut? Think it might be Tolland is to the east. So it's very far in there. And back in the day, you know, this would have been very new country for, settlers. You're going into, and God knows how territorial, disputes were actually worked out with, the indigenous peoples of the time, and what were there friendly relations or were they hostile, like between the settlers and the people who were living there, Um, so living in this place would have been stressful. It's not just like, oh, everything is good. You're still living in winters and, weather. It's not an easy situation. So you have to keep those things in mind as you're thinking about some of this lore. These people trying to farm aren't just they're still in the rugged wilderness of New England, So, after the Dudleys, Abiel Dudley is always mentioned as having gone mad, but maybe he just got old, maybe time just got to him.
Yeah.
The next, yeah, um, the next biggest one, I actually didn't find any info about the guy who apparently got killed, but in the house that next to what used to be Abiel Dudley's house, during the barn raising. That is discussed on the New England Historical Society their blog about Dudleytown. They do talk about that. Um, but I didn't personally find anything about that. Let me look right quick. Truth, actually, they don't mention that. That I have nothing on. I'll just say I have nothing on that. I do want to move to Herman Swift. Now there is an article, and I'm gonna find it. Give me one sec. I have so many articles about Dudleytown, it's ridiculous. All right. So this is from Wednesday, May 2nd, 1804, in the Hartford, Connecticut, Hartford Courant, Litchfield County, April 18th. In the thunder and hail of yesterday, the lightning struck and entered the house of General Herman Swift of Cornwall, which instantly killed Mrs. Swift. This amiable and esteemed lady was late the widow of Dr. Fay of Bennington, Vermont, and the daughter of the Honorable Moses Robinson. So this is lore, but it's true. And what's interesting about this article, it says lightning struck and entered the house of. Generally, they say she was on her porch, but this article says that it entered the house of. Now, I don't know how houses were designed in 1804 that lightning would come into the house. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a way, but in my mind, this is unheard of for me. But I find it interesting that it says that, and the lore often says on the porch. Um, as a I love history. So like learning about Sarah Swift, she was the daughter of Moses Robinson of Bennington, who was the second governor of Vermont, and several of her brothers were Green Mountain Boys. So if you're into Vermont history at all, that's just a cool fact that I thought was just it just gave more depth to the lore. And General Herman Swift was a Revolutionary War. He was pretty well known for just his name in the Revolutionary War. He fought alongside Lafayette and camped at Valley Forge with General Washington. As an aside, um, excuse me, as an aside, there are a lot of veterans, Revolutionary War and Civil War veterans out of Cornwall, and they have the Cornwall Historical Society has a lot of that on their website, which is fascinating. So they do say that Herman Swift. I mean, this is obviously a tragedy, um, and no, their house is not on Dudleytown. Their house is actually, I believe, it's on Bald Mountain. And if you go to the National Register of Historic Houses. His house is listed there. It's actually pretty cool to see it. Um, we did not drive by because honestly, I get so Bald Mountain and Dark Entry Forest Road are two roads that go up to Dudleytown Hill. Um, they're like I think the only two. It's weird because there's roads that go there, but you can't actually go there. So pause. Let me see. Just pausing for a second.
Yep. 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 Yep.
I'm just searching. I actually forgot about this. No, I'm not going to do this. It's going to take too long. All right. Okay, so their house is still standing and it's in the historical register, of historical places. So I mean I find that pretty close to Dudleytown, and some people will say it's not even on Dudleytown. Well, I mean it's one of the roads you could take to get to Dudleytown, so and it's only, a mile or two down. It's not even I don't even know if it's that far. So I say it's still close enough to be included, but um it's also said that he went mad, but he also allegedly went on to become a Connecticut legislator. So
Yeah, crazy person in U.S. Congress.
Times have
As
certainly
if that would
changed,
happen.
haven't they? Ha, ha, ha. That would never happen.
No, I don't think so.
No, they're
Anyway,
all, yeah, crickets. Did he go mad? I mean, was he wrought with grief? Could he have been? I mean, sure. His wife was randomly, through some act of nature, struck dead in their home. So, um, he did have Herman Swift did have a admirable service record and lived to be, I mean, I think he lived to be close to 100. So I mean, I'm not sure. It's funny when they say people went mad. Do I believe that he could have been racked with grief of some kind? Yes. Could also back in the day, I don't know that they understood. Obviously, they understood human emotion, but I feel like some things were not yet quite discovered like they are now. So like there were different
yeah,
terms for things. Do you know what I mean? So now, years into the future after this, in 1872, Mary Swift, which is the wife of Herman Swift's grandson. Let's see, where are you? None of my titles are here. Her house, it's just interesting to read the things that the newspaper talks about, but her house was broken into, and it's funny how they how they write these things like they're hold on. Let me find the article. So this is from April 11th, 1872. At Cornwall Bridge last Sunday night, the dwelling house of Mrs. Mary Swift was entered by burglars in the absence of the occupants, and a considerable amount of valuables taken and carried off. By the tracks the rascals made, there did not appear to be but two of them. The goods were found secreted in a barn, but the rogues have as yet eluded the vigilance of Detective Howland, who is scenting their tracks. She ended up dying 2 months later at the age of like 55. But it's just interesting. What I did find is stuff like this. There was tons of like body found in a basement, or this house was burgled, or this one walked in front of a moving train. This is all in Cornwall. And bearing in mind in the 1800s, between 1850 and 1920, the population dropped by half. So even at its height, Cornwall in 1850 was 2,000 people. That's not that many people,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
it's really just not. Yeah. So, of all this freak stuff happening, I found that while some of this lore might be able to be debunked, if you will, I hate the word debunked, but you know what I mean? Like, if you can find,
I kind of do too, but
right? Like, but what other word is there?
what else can we use?
I mean, we found the truth, but
Myth busted. That's it.
myth,
Myth busted.
exactly. Busted. You're busted. I found that there's as much as those, common lore uh points can be refuted or busted or whatever. I also found a lot of things in the news alone that I'm like, well, that's kind of bizarre. There
Do
was
tell.
the beloved doctor, and I don't have the article in front of me, but it's there that, in the late 1800s, the a beloved doctor in town was driving his horse and carriage across the railroad tracks and got hit by a train, dragged 138 feet and tossed in the air, and then died of his injuries. Like, what? Like what in what world does this? I mean, I know that in the 1800s, I've actually looked up the stat for other states in New England, but the main cause of death is accidents. That is one of the main historical causes of deaths, right? And now I don't understand how you could miss a roaring train coming at you, but who am I to judge? Um, it seemed to happen a lot in Cornwall. There was lots of on the railroad. There was several explosions, like set explosions to derail trains and things. There was lots of robberies, like I said. Well, I think it's while there were more workers there for these. the coal, what are they called? My brain just went. Blast furnaces. Um, it seems like there were more during that time at the height of the population, of course. But I mean, there's just like odd stuff like that. So even historically, there are odd things. Now, I started going through Find a Grave is a really great resource for just finding history. But what I started to discover, and now I haven't by any means, I have not gone into great depth or charting any of this, but I noticed a lot of there does seem to be a lot of just I don't want to say weird death because when you look on Find a Grave, you don't have much, you don't always have information, right? All you might see is the age or, they're married to this person or they're buried here. You only see those things, so you don't see any, there's no circumstance. But I started to notice that there did seem to be a lot of maybe I raised an eyebrow at some of the young deaths, like the kids, and that some of the middle-aged people, like between 30 and 50, seem to be dying a little bit more regularly than I would normally see. Again, this is just a cursory glance at this. I haven't done any um crazy digging or anything. I haven't really mapped it out, but I started to see like a lot of remarriages and a lot of like first spouse dying, and then Herman Swift, for example, was married 4 times. And his kids, this Mary Swift we were just talking about, Mary Swift was the second wife of his grandson. Now, I'm not saying that's abnormal, but it just seems that almost everybody did it. Like it's just something that made me go, huh, maybe I'll look into that one day. But for now, that's all I got. I have nothing in depth about that. So moving along, what else is there?
I
Let's
mean, there's
look.
quite a bit. I mean, but like you said, a lot of
There's so
it,
much.
when you kind of look at it in a historical context, it makes sense. Like,
Right
you were talking a bit, and something I wanted to touch on was the 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 Swift. I forget her, Mary Swift or the Swift wife, whatever. She's struck by lightning. Now, it wasn't uncommon for
there.
this is pre lightning rods on houses, which are designed to divert. You know, it's the highest
Right.
point of the house gets hit by lightning and it diverts into the ground. So the house itself is not vulnerable. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So like pre this, like lightning could still just hit your house and cause it to
Right.
burn to the ground, which is absolutely terrifying. But
Yeah.
nevertheless,
No kidding.
this was the time. So while you might read that and be like, oh wow, that's bizarre and that's crazy, and I'm sure there's some sort of you know supernatural thing behind that. It's seems to be rather common, and
Right.
I don't want to be I don't want to I don't want to sensationalize things. Even being the horror channel and whatnot, I don't want to be like, oh, it's Dudleytown, it's this and that. And I mean, we maybe if we do a video on it, like we'll make it a little more entertaining or that sort of thing. But I like to have the conversation. I like to have the kind of feedback about what's really going on, because that's really interesting, is the how things line up historically, uh,
Right.
and just making sense of things that have happened that
Well,
might
I
immediately.
think it adds a lot of context to the situation. Like I'm very much a context person and like I need as much supporting like detail, info as possible to really get the best picture,
Sure.
So when you do hear all this like in isolation, it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
And now, again, I'm going to add in a bit my opinion about the craziness of Dudleytown. But for now, I think it's just really important to really, really look at it. Um, I find the historical context is often fascinating and very informative. Um, and these stories are. what's interesting is these stories come from real people. So all these people existed. The Abiel Dudley existed, Sarah Swift existed, Herman Swift existed. Um, Dr. Clark he was a real person, William Cogshell Clark, and actually I want to touch on him in a minute. But one of the like kind of last story, not last, but one of the later, I guess, in the late 1800s, there's a story of it. It's kind of hard to. I see different versions of this. Um, Cornwall Historical Society.blogspot.com in 2014 wrote one of their myth points was John Patrick Brophy, wife died under mysterious circumstances. Their children mysteriously vanished, and Brophy was driven insane by the curse. So I guess they say in the original version of the story, in Starr's History of Cornwall, an unnamed Irish laborer suffered a series of misfortunes. His wife died of consumption. His sons left town after they were caught stealing, and his house burned down. None of these events could be attributed as supernatural. In later retellings, the Irish laborer's name is sometimes John Brophy, sometimes Patrick, sometimes other generic Irish names. Now, all right. So the Brophies were actually a family in Cornwall Bridge. We have it seems that Mrs. Richard Brophy was ill in 1897 October. And this is so funny too. It's not funny, but the way that the newspapers reported things in the 1800s and even the 1900s is so different than they do today. This is Mrs. Richard Brophy was taken to the New Haven Hospital Wednesday to be treated for a tumor. She has been feeble for some time. Dr. Curtis and her husband went with her. Miss Mary Brophy was visiting friends here from Waterbury. Like, just talking about people, like, yeah, she's been sick for a while. She went to the hospital with her husband and the doctor. It's like, what it's just interesting how that would happen back in the day. Completely airing people's personal medical business in the paper. But anyway, here we are. I'm looking for the one. I need to find it. Oh, here we are. All right. December 15th, 1898. Cornwall Bridge. Mrs. Richard Brophy, who has been along Mitch Chase. Mrs. Richard Brophy, who has been a sufferer for a long time from a complication of diseases, died at her home on Dudleytown Saturday last. Mrs. Brophy was a remarkably smart woman, always taking excellent care of her domestic affairs, and was always kind to those in sickness and death, always faithful to her church and a regular attendant, as long as her health would permit. She has been a great sufferer for these past 2 years. She was taken to the hospital for treatment, and when told by the surgeon they could do her no good, she, with remarkable cheerfulness, resigned herself to the fate that awaited her and suffered on until released by death. She leaves a husband and 5 children who lose a kind wife and affectionate mother. Her funeral was held at St. Bridget's Church on Monday. A large number of relatives and friends attended, Reverend Father Walsh officiating. Interment in the church cemetery. Her age was 44 years. Interestingly, I find this interesting, and I want to use this to kind of segue. Um, after talking about her funeral, the article goes on to say a strange animal making unearthly cries in the evening and prowling around near the Pinnacle and Hall's Cobble has alarmed the neighbors on that side of the Housatonic River so that they keep their guns loaded for panther. Selectman Hollister carries 2-pound packages of BB shot to throw right through it should he meet the animal. The animal has been seen, and the fearful yowl it makes has been heard by many. Children are home early, and men keep very seasonable hours. Additionally, so Richard Brophy is actually mentioned several times, as well as one of the sons and their daughter. So I'm gonna assume I'm not 1,000% sure that these are the same people of the legend, but I'm going to assume that they are because they mention Mrs. Brophy of Dudleytown and then Richard Brophy Jr. and Miss Mary Brophy. They talk about Richard. Here's another. Richard Brophy, while at work on this railroad section Wednesday, last had his foot and ankle badly injured by a rail striking it. It was a wonder his leg was not broken. He is unable to bear any weight on it at present. It is very unfortunate, for he is a very industrious man and has been employed on the railroad a long time. That is 1902, August 7th, 1902. February 10th, the same year, 1898, that his mother dies. Richard Brophy Jr. cut his ankle Friday last badly while chopping wood. Dr. Curtis sewed up and dressed the wound. He will be laid up for some time. And then we have 1903, April 16th, 1903. Richard Brophy, who has faithfully filled the duties as trackman on this section for 12 years, has resigned and will attend to his farm. So this is Richard. I'm assuming the woman who died on Dudleytown of mysterious causes and her family went insane and left or whatever. This kind of tells a different story for me. This tells of a wife who's been sick. I mean, she did die young. She died at 44. That's very young and left five children. I mean, that's again freaking horrifying. That by itself, honestly, is horrifying. Like, when you also look through the Connecticut papers from this time, you do see a lot of consumption and you see things like there are cures for diphtheria and just lots of I don't want to just say like consumption, but there is a lot of consumption and things like that, but there just is a lot of death and just a lot of there does seem to be a lot of weirdness. Now, I haven't compared it to other areas, like very specifically, um, especially for Cornwall being such a small town. I haven't compared that to, I don't know, another small town like itself. So I couldn't tell you if other towns have similar statistics. But I will say, like, after reading all of these things, I do feel like there is I don't know, maybe a little bit of an energy to Cornwall. I don't know if it's exactly like the lore says it is, because this story of the bro phase, it shows the dad, working at the same place for 12 years, his kids are also doing things and they're known by the community. Again, there's this I'm only looking at a couple sources, but I feel like it kind of tells a different story than the lore. However, the howling animal also, I think, says a lot too, because this is, almost the turn of the century. I know that in I think it was Connecticut, the last wolf in Connecticut was this is like a thing. Hold on. Because if you go to Putnam, Mashamoquett Brook State Park in Putnam, Connecticut, there's like this whole thing about how there used to be so many wolves there. In 1742, I think the last wolf was killed in Putnam, Connecticut. So if they're still having like howling animals, now I'm not saying I agree with taking out all the animals in New England, that's a whole other story in itself. We actually kind of touch on that a tad in the Miles Standish video because the killing of all the animals in the forested areas of New England is actually a big topic, um, especially related to Miles Standish. But anyway, if you're still having, after all the settlers taking out all the animals, if we're still having, panthers yowling, at the turn of the century, that says something for the wildlife in the area in northwestern Connecticut, in my opinion.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, no
Do you know what
kidding.
I mean?
Yeah. And like you were saying a minute ago, there's still could be some sort of energy there. And that's something you can, we'll never be able to definitively explain, but it kind of goes to show that there can be kind of truth in a lie. It gets
Right,
things get so hyped up, and there's all this, there's all it gets keeps going and going and getting more and more far fetched and everything. But at the
right,
core of it, it's like, is there something there? Maybe there
right,
is. Maybe there is. Maybe there is an energy. Maybe that gets stored in the earth, or from some sort of past
right.
trauma or tragedy or whatever it happens to be. Um, Maybe it's just spilled chemicals making everybody hallucinate. I don't know.
Well, then there's that. Then there's that because you did have, and this has been brought up with all the industry that was going on the river, in the town, with gosh, the industry has caused so much damage to the earth. And
Yeah,
if people really are going mad, like that could definitely be it. That's definitely something I came across in my research was people questioning that. And in 1900, let me check my notes here. One of the see, this is the thing where I looked at the whole area and I'm like, well, that's not cool. In 1900, where is it? New Milford Power floods tribal burial for a hydro plant. So in the neighboring town of Kent, Connecticut, there was I don't want to butcher this name, Shagtacoke Indian tribe had a burial ground, and there's been a lot of dispute about territory and property to this very day in regarding like that whole area. But there was a big problem with the fact that one of their burial grounds was flooded. I mean that's not good. So like that doesn't really leave good energy anywhere when you do things like that. I'm not saying that's Cornwall, but that happened in the neighboring town by a power company. Um, Additionally, if you move on to the Dr. William Clark story, after all the industry left, um, all the land that was previously owned by these, companies, they all sold it. They sold it cheap, and that's how, at least that's my assumption, is that that's where Dr. William Clark shows up and is like, "Oh, look, cheap land. Hey, this place is cool. Oh, I love it. Let's take it." Um, and how they acquired
the prices of
their
everything right now, I would buy up cheap haunted land anywhere.
yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Haunted, I don't care. I'll take it. Um, Now his story,
It's a 3 bedroom, two bath. Two of the bedrooms are extremely haunted. Can't live in them.
but the rest of the house is fine. I don't care. Um, so I'm looking through all my clippings here, and I'm trying to find there's a lot of coverage of oh, here it is. Now here's an interesting thing. Now I want to put it out there as far as the Dr. Clark thing. A lot of people question this dark entry forest association, and oh, they're very shady, they're doing this, that, and the other thing. Why won't they let anyone in? They're hiding something, blah 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 blah. Now, I'm
Well,
not saying
it is a land conservation. I believe it's a land trust and conservation, correct?
right.
And
So
that's kind of their job.
right,
Keep
yeah,
people
so
out. And
exactly. Well, no, if you look at if you look at historically in New England, and again, we cover this in the Miles Standish video, in the mid to late 1800s, these settlers came in and like stripped the land,
right,
like cleared it. I mean, pretty bad. So by the turn of the century and into the early 1900s is when they really started to be like, oh my gosh, we have to conserve this, and started to maybe somebody had the idea that we shouldn't just be stripping the land, right? Like, there was no more timber and the animals and everything was just bare. So they started to come in and this is part of something that the Dark Entry Forest Association did. Now, they were founded, I think it was 1924, um, in that Cornwall area on Dudleytown, not only Dudleytown, but there's actually this interesting article from 1981, January 20th, 1981, from the Hartford Courant, and it's titled Special Communities Exist in State's Wilderness. Now, this, and there's a little subtitle that says their names, Yelping Hill and Dark Entry Forest, give a clue to the quirks of their creators. Now, before I read this again, I want to say that a lot of people are weirded out by Dark Entry Forest and, why are they so secretive? Why won't they let anyone on their property? But again, that's the whole point. So I'm gonna skip over. There's a couple of them. I found several articles about this, and this is a thing in other New England states also. I'm gonna cut to Dark Entry Forest because they talk about Yelping Hill, and it's named that because of, I guess, foxes in the area that yelp. So again, more animals in the area that make noise that might freak people out. Okay. So, not long after Yelping Hill Association was formed, another group, mostly professional people from New York City, led by Dr. William Cogswell Clark, formed Dark Entry Forest, Inc. The name was derived from a brook that runs through the property. The origins of the brook's name, however, are lost in the mists of history, said Clifton Reed, a longtime member. Clark had bought the land in 1909 for back taxes, said his son William C. Clark Jr. Clark's granddaughter Dodie Wolfe added that he bought the land with the intention of having a community. In 1924, 41 charter members, mostly professional friends and colleagues of Clark's, bought the land from him and formed a membership corporation planning to use the property for a demonstration of the principles of forest preservation. They intended also, said Reed, to gain knowledge of the forestry and develop skills in the woodworking arts and to have a place to gather with their families. As at Yelping Hill, members are entitled to lease for their lifetime a 1 acre building site with 4 acres surrounding it to comply with zoning regulations. They build and own their own homes, but may sell them only to other members or to their heirs who must also become members. So basically, like they do things like plowing with horses. Like it's all very natural. It's all very, conservation minded. That's just one quick excerpt to talk about that. But I mean, everything I found about Dark Forest Entry is all about conservation. Like and here's where again we get, okay, well, what's really behind the weirdness, but also added weirdness. Um if you go to the Cornwall Historical Society website, they talk about this. They planted like 40,000 trees or something outright, like an enormous amount of trees. So if you go to the Cornwall Historical Society.org and you go under, you'll find Out of the Woods. When settlers first arrived in the 1940s, Cornwall was covered, sorry, when its first settlers arrived in the 1740s, Cornwall was covered in forest. Less than a century later, most of the town was open farmland. Today, Cornwall is 81% forest thanks in part to restoration efforts in the 1920s and 30s when more than, oh, I'm sorry, I said 45,000. It's 450,000 trees were planted. Now,
Well,
yeah, that's a lot. Um, I'm trying to look for where it talks about. So, yeah, there was around that time they really started to ramp up conservation, preserving. Like there is a stand of trees. It's called the Cathedral Pines. It used to be a bigger section, but some of it was conserved specifically. Somebody bought it specifically to conserve it and save it from getting cut down. Um, Bear with me as I go through here because there's a lot of information. They talk about maple syrup and whatever they were doing in Cornwall. Um, Reference for trees. Yeah, so uh, as an aside, the Cornwall Historical Society has an amazing website. They have photos from, the late 1800s that show the place, devoid of all the trees. And if you see Cornwall today, it is not like this. So, you also got to think, I also think that plants and trees have energy and they have, they're living beings. They're living organisms. So when
Yeah.
you,
Sure.
when you take that out, that harms the land. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't just go unscathed. So yeah, here's a headline on their website. Felon burning charcoal pit. Horrible death of boy near Turrington. Walked home in dying condition. 16-year-old boy at West Cornwall last night. Horrible death of Emil Ruitt from burns received in a charcoal pit there on Sunday. Jeez. Preservation movement. Wooded Road to Cornwall Bridge. There's just so many pages here. Bear with me as I go through. I just want the info about the Pines because that is a place that I had Cathedral Pine. Oh, I could have selected it. Okay. Okay. So the Cathedral Pines, before 1989, Cathedral Pines was one of the most spectacular old growth pine forest in the Northeast. Early preservationists who valued the beauty of the forest over the monetary value of timber protected the pines from logging. Cathedral Pines was a popular tourist attraction by the late 1800s and was featured on numerous postcards in the early 1900s. No other village in the state has such a treasure in the way of a natural park. Such a dense growth of lofty pines is rarely seen in any part of our country. Theodore S. Gold, History of Cornwall, 1904. The cathedral fi- the Cathedral Pines Forest was established between 1770 and 1800. They were part of a 1,000-acre farm inherited by Major Seth Pierce, who was born in 1785 when the pines first started taking root. Following Pierce's death in 1881, Frederick Kellogg negotiated the sale of the pines to John E. Calhoun, who vowed to preserve them as a majestic forest. The pines were at different times called Calhoun's Pines and the Calhoun Grove. So this place was like it was a 42 acres, was deeded to the Nature Conservancy in 1967. This eventually became a national natural landmark in 1982. Um, in 1989, most of the pines were destroyed by a tornado. So
Wow.
here's
Okay.
right. So like, here's this
That's a
like
little bizarre, but it
right.
sounds good to me. But okay.
Yeah, it is bizarre because like what? Like wait a minute, what? So now it's much less now. It's not 42 acres anymore because they were and there's I forget where I saw the pictures. I don't think it was on the Cornwall site, but there is a picture of the pines like toppled by from the tornado. It's like, wait, what? Like it's just it kind of shows like this place just might be a little messed up, right? Like it's just odd to me. I find it
Hmm.
crazy. One more point I wanted to add was that the Dark Entry Forest Association, and I don't have it in front of me, but there was a point where they planted all those trees, and like a good significant portion of them got wiped out by some sort of disease. So I feel
Disease.
like it's always like one step forward and like a step back with this place. You know what I mean? Like there's always something there. I don't know how to describe how I feel like that, but um with everything I read, it seems like this talks about there's even a destructive forces section on their website. Insects, fungi, storms, and fire. Um in the past 100 years, all these forces that are messing, destroying. the hurricane of 1938 came through and did damage. Like 1788, a hurricane blew large quantities of the timber of the woods as well as fencing and a few buildings in Cornwall. So like there's always something in Cornwall. Very recently there was and I actually very recently there's a story about somebody getting run over by a lawnmower. In this town of like 900 people, a lot sure happens. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, that is
it's
something to consider there. To be
yeah,
sure.
like it's just a little bit bizarre, So
You know what? You know what?
as
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say what, and I'm getting a little off track here. I just found it's just funny. I find I find that given my affinity for the paranormal, the weird things in life, I'm a very skeptical person. But
Right,
the with all the facts kind of presented with Dudleytown, or at least like what we've seen, there's just so much. Like you say, there's all these there's all these weird occurrences in this small area with small population, and it's just like seems to be this concentration of weirdness. But then there's all these other just gross exaggerations that are at
right,
the same time. You know what I mean? So it's strange. So you have the over exaggeration of it, and then you have this like, well, okay, still it's kind of weird. It's weird to think about. So it's interesting.
right.
I
And
Go ahead.
I want to kind of close out the historical stuff with one last newspaper article. They talk about the story of Dr. Clark's wife and how he came back to find her, having lost her mind, and how she lived out the rest of her life in a, I think somewhere it said in a mental hospital or not with her wits, or I don't know. Unfortunately, that's not correct. Now, did she suffer from something? I found this article. It's Professor's Wife a Suicide. Mr. William C. Clark shoots herself in a hotel Manhattan. Within a few hours after she had registered at the Hotel Manhattan yesterday, Mrs. Harriet S. Clark, wife of William C. Clark of Tenafly, New Jersey, a professor of Columbia University, committed suicide. She had attempted to hang herself, but failing in this, shot herself in the head. A revolver lay on the floor under her body, but the shot was not heard in the hotel. Her body was found when a servant opened the door of her room with a passkey. The maid notified James E. Barrett, assistant manager of the hotel, and he called the policeman. Despondency because of her ill health is said to have caused Mrs. Clark to take her life. In a letter addressed to the manager of the hotel, Mrs. Clark told of her illness and asked that Dr. G.H. Ryder, 45 West 50th Street, should be notified of her death. It was through the doctor that the authorities learned that Mrs. Clark lived in New Jersey, for she had registered as Mrs. Frederick A. Clark of New Hampshire. Dr. Ryder said that Mrs. Clark had been suffering from a nervous disorder. Mrs. Clark lived at Knickerbocker Road and Sunset Lane in Tenafly, New Jersey. She was the daughter of the late Hardy M. Banks of Englewood, and her sister was the widow of Dr. Edward N. Clark, who was her husband's brother. So I find that if you put that parallel to the story, that the wife potentially did have, maybe she was tormented in a way, and maybe not necessarily in, I look at mental torment can be just as haunting as a, you know, haunting of a paranormal variety,
Yeah, sure. I mean,
you know,
I've known people who have done similar things in their lives, and they had no
right,
weird experiences. So that can be chalked up to a number of things for sure.
right. So here we are again with, well, what's behind the truth. Maybe there is some semblance of truth to the lore. How things travel, how word travels or stories travel, people,
So
the game of telephone.
so she did in fact um, kill herself.
it seems that this appears to be her, and that she did off unalive herself.
But it looks like the doctor himself stayed there, and he was also the founder of the Dark Forest Association, correct? If I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken, or his
the
descendant.
the dark entry forest. Yes.
Yeah, Dark Forest, Dark Entry. Sorry,
Yeah.
the Dark Forest. No,
The dark forest.
interesting, interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, he stayed there the entire time and continues to, so it didn't deter
Well,
him. Something, you know,
no, no, he continued on with the conservation efforts, and the dark entry forest still exists today. Um, and that wasn't their year-round home. That was their summer home. Or like their, getaway home, second home, or it wasn't their primary. But no, he seemed to have continued on and stayed in Dudleytown and continued whatever work he was doing there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
It's certainly interesting. There's a lot going on there to kind of digest and kind of look at, especially considering how much has been just blown out of proportion. But
right.
it's also worth noting the just general weirdness of it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your experience there? So what's like you said you went there. Elaborate on that a bit. Tell me what that was like.
So we went there in, I think it was early fall of last year, and the leaves hadn't fully fallen off yet. We didn't have the trees were still full. We arrived kind of late. We came from several hours away, and we started late in the day. So my first impression, we've been there twice. Both impressions, like I've said, that Cornwall is utterly just, it's gorgeous. And it has that misty, foresty feel. But like I've said, that the colors, it does have a different color. And it does have a different, I don't know, certain something. Like it has its own feeling. It's very misty, like I've said. The fog rolls in. It's got these gorgeous sunsets. Both times I was there, the sunsets were just outstanding. However, however, a couple things. And I'm gonna say I'll start with the small ones and I'll end with the major one. The small ones were we went up Mohawk. Mohawk, I think it's Mohawk State Forest is just north of Dudleytown. And there's like is it the Poets Tower? It's just an interesting, you can drive up to the top of the, and there's views. Of course, when we were there, it was foggy. We couldn't really see, but still, it's always fun to have a mountain you can drive up. On the way down, we came across this deer that was, I don't know, it just had a way about it. Like it kind of came out of nowhere, like it was spooked almost. And then it stopped and just stared at us. Now I know deers do this, okay? I'm very familiar with deer and how they behave, but this one was just a
Typically
little
not.
off. Yeah, but it wasn't like that. It was a little, I don't know how to describe how it was off, but it was just off. Like, all right, whatever. I didn't quite think much of it. Um, Another thing was that the fog, and now I have this actually on video, which I haven't exactly like gone through the video, but I know that I was recording when this happened. There was a weird thing with the windshield. We could not, for a time, we could not clear the windshield of the fog. Like, I know that might sound trivial, but I mean, we were driving and like it wouldn't, like it almost became like I felt like we were in a movie because we couldn't get like we had the wipers going, the proper defrost, and normally, you figure out how your car best clears
Mine's
your
mine's
winch.
pretty good. Mine defrosts almost instantly.
Mine does too.
Yeah,
It's
so if you're
pretty good. Yeah, like, and I know how to manage it. So like, if I might have a little bit of trouble, I know what to do. You know how you find your car's language with the with the defroster, and you're like, all right, I gotta put the windows here and put this here and do that. Like, I've been doing this for years. Like, but for some reason, it was like this, and we even made a joke about like the fog in Cornwall. Like, we were making jokes about, like the fog is a horror element. And it wasn't even particularly foggy at that time. It seemed like a little bit of a freak, like, what the hell why can't we clear the windshield? So those are just like little whatevers. Um, we went down to, we tried every way we could to find the trail into Dudleytown, but it's grown over. They don't keep it up. You cannot get there like without trespassing. We went down this side back road, like on the almost on the back side of Dudleytown, and we actually came across a historical cemetery that was like completely grown over with ferns. It was neglected. It's down this dirt road, and it has these views of Dudleytown Hill. We couldn't quite see them from where we were standing. Like we knew it was there, but the trees were in the way. Do you know what I mean? Um, Other than that, we went to Cathedral Pines, and this was where it, the experience at Cathedral Pines was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced in nature. It's me, my husband, and our two kids. We go hiking all the time. It's not, this isn't new to us. We pull in, it's a very small parking spot. Now, I immediately notice that the color, and it does seem darker. Not because it was, dark out, but because like it's just that the forest there is weird. So I'm like, all right, whatever, no big deal. I walk into the forest and I immediately start to feel like heavy in the head. And then I'm like, all right, I ignore it. I keep walking, and it's not a crazy trail. It's just a path that winds up a little bit of an incline through the Cathedral Pines. So you're surrounded by some of them are fallen, or there's ghost pipe mushrooms everywhere, and there's these huge pine trees, and you know. So as I round the first bend, I start to really feel just really disoriented. Like I couldn't focus my eyes. And then I kept seeing out of the corners of my eyes. I don't know how else to describe them except maybe shadows or
Oh, okay.
black forms. Yeah. And I'm like, all
Like
right,
on the
let's
periphery.
kind of, yeah. Like I was
Oh,
seeing
interesting.
like,
Well, some of the things that I read when, just looking up different accounts and whatever was, they talked about seeing some shadow figures on the periphery, on
yeah.
the tree lines and whatever.
Uh-huh.
So interesting. Interesting. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, like, all right, there's no way. Like, come on. Like I'm also always skeptical. I'm very open-minded, but I'm always skeptical and I'm always looking for the logical explanation first, right? But like this, I start again, I'm getting very like heavy in the head, disoriented. Like I felt like my eyes were all messed up, like I couldn't see. It, it was almost like I don't know how to describe this except to say I'm a photographer, and there's a certain when you edit out certain colors or shades or certain kinds of light out of photos in post, when you're editing a photo, you drastically change it. So what it felt like to me was a color was missing on the color wheel of the forest. Like I don't know how else to say that, but that's exactly what it looked like.
Well,
You know
that's
what I
pretty.
mean? Like, yeah, it was
I
very.
kind of understand what you're saying.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I don't know how else to say it, but like the color was like that. It was like when you try to edit green and green's hard to edit. It can be hard to edit. So like it was like I was in Lightroom, like it was crazy. So I keep going. I'm like, all
There
right,
I
no,
was
just
in the studio editing
suddenly I became
day
part of
three,
my photo editing software. So
day three of a 2 hour project. Hmm.
then I woke up and realized I had just been editing too much. All right, so Um, I tell myself, just keep going, get on with it. My 9-year-old is in front of me, and almost falls off the trail into like the tree litter. Now there's like I said, there's like uprooted trees and like so it's not exactly friendly for him to fall off the trail. And my husband is like, did he looks like he just got pushed. And he's standing there kind of disoriented himself, like, what just happened? Because he's very, he's very agile. He's very physical, he's doesn't usually I don't know. That wasn't it was out of character for him for what just happened, and it seemed like he had been pushed. But no, obviously we didn't push him. So then he started to get a little bit freaked out and he was like, I started vocalizing how I was feeling. He's like, I feel the same. And I'm like, all right. And so my younger daughter started running around almost like she was gonna run around the bend and disappear from sight. And it was like she was I don't know. It was like and at the risk of sounding like a psychopath, I'm just gonna say what it felt like. Like it felt like I don't know. She was being led like away from us. Like I'm very diligent about keeping the kids with us.
Ooh,
But it just didn't feel right. Yeah, it did not feel right at all. So
like,
at that moment, I called her back. I'm like, no, no, heck no. We're not continuing. We are turning around right now. And even as I turned around, I just felt like my whole center of gravity was off. Like everything felt lopsided and weird. It was almost like walking into a world that got tipped. Like I don't know how else to describe it. We got back to the car and we got the hell out of there. And I was just like, huh, I guess what they say about Dudleytown is true. This place is fucking weird. And we continued on like driving, around um the way it's kind of set up is the roads like almost hug Dudleytown and the mountains. Like they go around it. So you could take like, one small road over and the long road down back to the main road. Like if you looked at the map, you'd see it's like a long rectangle. And the whole time I just felt like, wow, this place is noticing other places where the color is off and it was like that in other places in town and along the drive and it was just after that I was like I know that a lot of these things can be maybe slightly maybe not disproven but um maybe a better focus on the real people and all that or whatever the facts are but I think when you look at um when I look at our experience there, because it wasn't just me, if I look at our experience there and I look at, you know, um, other things reported, I don't know. Maybe there's something to it that maybe there is something in that area that's not right. And maybe,
yeah, I've heard some of those same things in other
yeah,
other accounts.
yeah, it was definitely one of the most bizarre. I've had some bizarre experiences now. Like I'm not whatever, but this one was definitely bizarre. Yeah.
I'll say.
Yeah. And I believe that things happen. Now, I don't know. There I am.
Wow,
All I got. Yeah.
that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, so how far in did you guys get before you
Oh God, not far. I mean, not even 100 feet.
really? So
Probably not. Yeah,
and
when
then
it
you
started,
had the experience with the deer. You said is that was on your way in or on your way out?
that was when we. So that was on our way into like the area. We went first because we didn't really when we first got there the first time we had no idea like you got to get your bearings oh we did drive up so we first drove where the deer was um we did drive up to Mohawk Mountain which is like it's actually I think you can ski there and it's open to the public and that's cool that's where we saw the deer at the bottom of Mohawk Mountain and then we went back to the main road and we drove down and we did drive up Dark Entry Forest Road. And we went as far as we could. Now, I will tell you that it's a god awful incline driving up Dark Entry Forest Road. Um,
Mm.
We got to the top. We didn't see anyone. Like sometimes they say that there's a woman who lives up there with an SUV or something, and she will come out and start yelling at you. We didn't see any people. Um, and at the time, it did seem a little off. Like we didn't hear any. I don't recall hearing anything in the woods. Um, we got to the top, and there's notes like this trail's blocked. You can't go any further. Turn around. Blah 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 blah. So there used to be a point where you could go through there. You can't anymore. I guess they've just too much attention has come to the town. Too many people have come, like they've started fires, hikers get lost out there, people trespass, like people come in and cause all sorts of problems. So, they've changed the name of I believe it's Bald Mountain Road used to be Dudleytown Road, and they changed it to Bald Mountain to just, dissuade some people from going there. But there's, state police have to go in and get people, and like it's actually ridiculous. And there's a lot of coverage about, you know, the seekers, ghost hunters or, you know, whatever else you want to call them, in going into there. And actually there's videos on YouTube of people trespassing, kids trespassing, belligerently trespassing into Dudleytown. I'm like, jeez. So yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Understand. I mean, I personally understand. I understand the lure of places like this because I want to see them. I mean, I'm into this. I'm very interested in exploring things, but I don't know. I wonder if it just doesn't want us there.